Welcome to another episode of the Morning Almonds Podcast. It's not breakfast, it's nourishment. The kind that feeds us through music, food, storytelling, and honest conversation. Let's get cracking. Welcome, friends, and I thank you so much for spending time with me today. I want to welcome you to the 5th episode of Morning Almonds, where today I talk about my love of music, from my earliest memories to my latest favorite bands. This is the story about how life has changed my music as much as music has changed my life. I'm recording this on Monday before Thanksgiving, so I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving, some great family time and good eats, and just giving thanks for everything that we have, an attitude of gratitude, right? I want to do a little bit of a little bit of an RIP for Todd Snider, who passed away recently. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Todd and his music. I got to see Todd once in Kansas City with Ryan Peters, my best friend from high school, and it was at the Folly Theater. And if you've never been to the Folly Theater is very stuffy. And I mean that as in the decor and the seating arrangements and everything. There's not a pit. You're not going to stand and rock out at a show. The staff is fantastic, and it's a beautiful venue, but it's stuffy. And so, for those of you that know Todd, him playing in a stuffy theater just doesn't kind of mix. So we get in and we get sat down, and I can also tell right away that the crowd is super stuffy. And Ryan loves Todd, and his son was with us. And we're having a great time, and Chicago Farmer opened. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. Great stuff, some good folk storytelling music. And Todd has a song called D.B. Cooper. There's a few different times in that song where people kind of shout things out, and there's this one part where the crowd shouts out a certain word. And Ryan had been enjoying himself this whole concert, singing and getting into it and having a great time. And there was these people around him that kept looking at him and throwing him shade. And after he shouted out the word in that one song, D.B. Cooper, these folks just got really animated and upset. And I leaned over to Ryan and I said, "Dude, you keep having a good time. Don't let these people dictate your good time." And I'm not sure that Ryan even knew what was going on because he was so in the moment. I'll never forget that. That was a really good concert. I'm glad I got to see Todd. And then my second grandchild was born on November 4th, little Miss Ellie Mae Bridges. And she is welcomed home by my grandson, Emmett, who will be 4 at the end of January. And Papa Nick and Mama JC are doing fantastic and just wonderful. So I really am the wealthiest man that I know. I am a very lucky and wealthy man in a lot of areas. Okay, some guys have cars and sports, working on things in their shop or the garage, etc. I have music. I have bands and songs. I feel like music, songs, lyrics, it's all window to the soul. I mean, you've got some soulless shit out there, don't get me wrong. The stuff that's written by a man that's sung by a woman, all that poppy stuff. So there is some soulless shit out there. I'm not a musician. I don't write or read music. I used to be able to. But like I always say, musicians need people like me to be able to enjoy everything and to absorb it and spread their music and spread what they're doing. They need people like us that aren't technically musicians. They need us music lovers. If we were all musicians, would anybody be listening to anything? I don't know. It's like if we were all billionaires, everything would be expensive, right? As far as the musician thing goes, it's why I don't criticize a lot of bands. Just being able to be up on stage and doing something like that is incredible. I think it takes incredible courage and a lot of putting yourself out there And so for people to criticize artists, I don't know. It's just not something that I consciously try to not criticize music artists. Now, there have been a couple bands that I've seen live that were just absolutely horrible. But like my friend Nate says, they're already out of 4. 4 out of 10. Every band is already out of 4 because they're already doing their thing, right? Just doing what they want to do and what is being called to them to do is they're already out of 4. But some of my earliest musical memories, I can remember, I didn't come from a musical house. I can remember my mom dancing around the living room one time at a house in Dodge City, and I remember it was so odd. It was such an event that never took place that I remember getting out of bed to go to the living room and find out what was going on. I'm not sure what she was listening to. It might have been some Neil Diamond or something like that. But my first real musical memories are worship songs at church. I think a lot of us, our first introduction to music was in church, and then at school as well. I can remember going to swimming lessons, and our babysitter at the time, this would have been around 81 or 82, because I remember going to swimming lessons, and our babysitter had a van, and I was in the back seat, and I remember I Love a Rainy Night by Eddie Rabbitt came on. And I can remember that song sticking with me quite well. Another tune I remember was Raspberry Beret by Prince. We had gone into a store in Dodge City, and this would have been, 85 or so. And then when we moved to Greensburg, I have recollections of Mom listening to like Roy Orbison and Dion. She had stereo equipment as well, and I'm not sure where she got that stuff, probably from her boyfriend. I can still smell that equipment warming up. Like when you turned it on, there was like a hum and a glow and a warmth. And then there was a smell that you don't get with today's equipment. Another one of my earliest memories is when I lived in Greensburg. We lived next to the Jellisons on Grant Street. And this would have been around 1984, so I would have been around 8 or 9. They had a picnic table out there, and I can remember doing air guitar to Quiet Riot's Slick Black Cadillac, and I fell off the picnic table backwards and landed straight on my back and knocked the wind out of me, and I'll never forget old man Vic. He was laughing pretty hard at that, but that's a pretty core musical memory. But I believe that not having parental influence on music led me to being very, very open and accepting of a lot of music forms and types. I didn't come from a musical family, mom or dad's side. My uncles, they were musicians. Uncle Bruce played sax. Uncle Jerry played guitar. I played the flute and then the first few bars of Smoke on the Water on guitar. That's it. And then mom's boyfriend, he played a lot of instruments. He had guitar, trumpet, harmonica, a banjo. He gave me an acoustic Alvarez guitar when I was 15. It was a beautiful guitar, and I wish now that I would have learned to play the thing, but I ended up selling it for a tux rental my sophomore year because a junior had asked me to prom, and I didn't have any money to do so, so I sold that guitar. As far as my dad's side goes, he didn't play any instruments. And then going through his writings, I discovered he really disliked rock and roll, which makes me, I don't know, it's hilarious to me that my dad hates rock and roll because I love rock and roll. Love it. Like I've had a lot of different loves of music. I've had a lot of different types of genres that I've really gotten into over the years, from rap to reggae. But it always comes back to those rockin', screeching guitars for me. Every single time. When I was growing up, getting a little bit older, I can remember hiding in my closet with a small transistor radio because music was literally the devil in my house. If it wasn't Christian, anything that wasn't approved of, it was literally the devil. But I would sit in that closet late at night and try to pick up anything I could. And it was mainly a lot of Hispanic music and then Christian radio and a lot of country. And then when I became a teenager and got beyond what crappy songs were on the radio, my life changed immensely. I was introduced to all sorts of albums, artists, songs, new ways of thinking. My first real musical love, though, was gangster rap, particularly NWA and Eazy-E. I had been given a copy of Easy Does It on cassette. That was in 7th grade. I was in library, and one of the guys in the class ahead of me came by and gave me this copy of Easy Does It. And man, I fell in love with that shit. And then I fell into KRS-One and Boogie Down Productions, Public Enemy, Tribe Called Quest. That type of rap wasn't gangster rap. It was a little bit more, it was way more of a conscious thing and talking about, real shit, not just gangster stuff. So I really fell into the rap. I loved it. And I believe that my early love for rap and hip-hop and hard rock, well, the hard rock was, the first cassette I ever bought was Whitesnake, self-titled, from a drugstore in Greensburg. But I think that is what primed me for my love of 311, because they infused so many different types of music into one. So then our other saving grace in that small town of 1800 was Randall's Electronics. They had catalogs of any types of music you could think of, and they would order whatever we wanted. And that was great because we didn't have, like I said, we didn't have good radio. We didn't have, MTV wasn't prolific at that time. I can also remember in grade school, Miss Marshall, her music class. She had Music Fridays where we could bring any type of music and she would play it. And if I remember correctly, we would alternate between the boys and the girls. A boy would get to play a song, then a girl would get to play a song. And I specifically remember Tears for Fears, Everybody Wants to Rule the World was one that we played a lot. Then there were street dances. Street dances were a big deal. That was those were my first live concerts, technically. You had bands like King Midas and the Mufflers, Freddie Fox and the Hot Rods. But street dances were a big deal. It was, a time to hang out, get away from the parents or supervision, just kind of run all over town. And then I know you all remember the Columbia House BMG days, where you could get 12 cassettes or 12 CDs for a penny. Those ads are where I learned a lot of names of albums and bands just by studying those ads. And then there was also those Time Life music compilation commercials where they would scroll the individual songs and have like just a small little snippet. That's where I learned a lot of music too. There was an alley behind my house in Greensburg, and there was a junkyard behind it. A literal for real junkyard. And we weren't supposed to go in there and mess around, but we would. And one day I was coming back across the alley and I looked down and I see in the dirt, I see a cassette tape. And there's nothing on this tape. It was a blank tape that had been recorded on. And so I remember putting it in the tape player and didn't know any of the songs. Couldn't figure it out. And this was probably 85 or 86. And I don't remember when I found out, but it was Rat, Round and Round. My music journey really kicked off with my buddy Ryan. He introduced me to Ozzy, Kiss, Beatles. We would watch this movie. It was Kiss Phantom in the Park. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but it's absolutely horrible. But Kiss is running all over this amusement park trying to find the Phantom. That has been stuck with me for all these years. But I had a small little boombox, and I would walk around town when I was in my rap phase, playing BDP and KRS-One, Public Enemy. And there was a bunch of little mixtapes that had all sorts of rappers on it from East Coast, West Coast. So I learned a lot about that. And And I had this desire to be black based off that music, and I had no idea what the fuck I was talking about or thinking. I thought that those rappers were just cool as shit to me, and they had this swagger. I had always been drawn to kind of like the criminal side, like mob stuff, gangster stuff, underground. So that music really spoke to me. And like I said, I didn't know what I was talking about. I wanted to be black. I had no idea what that meant, what that truly meant. I had came across another tape. It was a compilation, and it had songs like Beth from Kiss, Show Me the Way by Frampton, and some Nazareth song, and a couple others. The song Beth, though, it really was beautiful to me. I loved the music. And if you're not familiar with the song Beth, it's about a musician who can't come home because he's playing with the boys. They're practicing. And I wanted my mom to hear this song. It was so beautiful to me, and I wanted my mom to hear this song. And I put the headphones on her head, and I pressed play on the Walkman, and she listened. And when she got done, she took the headphones off, and she said something to the effect of, "Oh, another man that can't be home and take care of his family." Which, from her framework, that's exactly the way she looked at it. That's exactly the way she heard it. From mine, I thought it was a beautiful song. The first albums I can remember listening to front to back were Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms, Rattle and Hum and Joshua Tree by U2, Bat Outta Hell by Meatloaf. I listened to a ton of Bruce Hornsby, NXS, and then Great White. For those of you that aren't aware, there's a song called Wasted Rock Ranger, and it's on the B side of the cassette single to Once Bitten, Twice Shy. I think that's the only place you could get it at the time. It wasn't on the record. But we were the Greensburg Rangers, and the song was Wasted Rock Rangers, and so, we got into that one for a while. Tesla, Psychotic Supper from 1992 is one of my all-time favorite albums, especially for some good rock and roll, some good guitars. You want a good guitar solo today? Look up Tesla, Don't De-Rock Me. Fantastic song. I also learned a lot about music when I worked at Dylan's. The older guys that worked there taught me a lot about classic rock and then grunge, specifically Alice in Chains and Stone Temple Pilots. This was before Pearl Jam blew up. My cousin Jeremy, this would have been in 1990. I would have been about 14. I can remember him bullying me into giving him money to buy Facelift by Alice in Chains on cassette. That was a good choice. He could have bullied me for money for something a lot worse, I guess, right? Before we move on to my musical journey after I moved to Lawrence, there was something that would happen in high school a lot, and I don't remember when it started. But in high school, I would get phone calls. And back then, you didn't necessarily have caller ID. I'm sure we had caller ID, but you could do a star 6-7. You could block your number. I would get these random phone calls, and when I picked up the phone, the song I Can't Fight This Feeling Anymore by REO Speedwagon would be playing. Never found out who it was. I always assumed it was a girl. And as I got older, I thought, well, I guess it could have been a guy. But this happened a lot, and it always left me curious on who it was. So if you know who was calling my house in Greensburg and playing I Can't Fight This Feeling Anymore by REO Speedwagon, and you think you want to let me know, reach out, because I'm not going to lie, I'm curious. It's something that's always kind of left this, something that I've always been curious about. So if you have any information, let me know. All right, so moving on. Growing up in Southwest Kansas, you could count on two things. You could count on a windy day, and you could count on shit radio. And then I moved to Lawrence, where they had KLZR, the laser. And that was real radio. These guys broke bands. You could literally hear them one day and watch them live the next weekend. The live music scene in Lawrence back then was absolutely insane. Everyone from that era, big and small, came through. There was so much live music. It was fantastic. So by this time it's the mid-90s, and I'm starting to go to my first shows, but I had gotten kicked out of KU and moved to Ottawa, and that's where I met Travis Prosser. Travis loved going to concerts, and it took me, moving away from Lawrence to understand what was going on in that town as far as music goes. But there were so many great bands back then. My favorite of them was Paw. And Paw's lead singer is Mark Hennessy. And Mark is now the lead singer of the band Godzillionaire. It was wonderful, wonderful music. But Paw was my favorite of those bands. There was Stick, Tenderloin, Slackjaw, Salty Iguanas, Kill Creek. And 90s music was delicious. And I'm not talking about just the grunge and the rock. I think of bands like Morphine and Soul Coughing. You had Cake, Radiohead, the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, Matthew Sweet, on and on. So there was more than just the grunge, more than just the rock and roll in the 90s music. I have a Technics CD player, and it holds 100 discs. I bought it back in 99. And it was a whole unit. It had a receiver, a tape deck, the equalizer. But the only thing that remains today is that CD changer. And the belt on it wore out. And I replaced the belt. Cost me about $7. I was reloading the CDs after I got it fixed. And I realized how many of them were angry ones. There was so much angry music back then. There's a lot of angry music now. I suppose I just choose not to listen to the angry music. And that's an example of how life has changed my music. I've gotten softer. I've slowed down. That changes the type of music that you enjoy. So that leads us into live music. And my first experience would have been in church, like many kids. There was a guy named Jay Hildinger, and he played the drums, and he had a full trap set. And that's how he would minister. He would minister through his drums. He would get up there and just play, just improvise. That grabbed my attention right away, right? And then my Uncle Bruce played saxophone. And there was piano. I don't know who played the piano. But my first live concert, all right, everybody get ready for this. My first live concert was at Greensburg High School. And this would have been March 8th, 1989. And I don't know if any of you remember DC Talk, the Christian rap group, but they opened up for DeGarmo and Key, a Christian rock group, and they played Greensburg High School. That was technically my first live concert. I was going through all my ticket stubs, trying to place my first concert. And in my mind, I'd had all this time, this was my first concert. In my mind, it was, my memory was telling me it was Wilco or Typo Negative or the show at Sandstone with Live, No Doubt, and PJ Harvey in 95. I had always told myself those were my first concerts. But as I was thinking about it, the whole DC Talk, DeGarmo, and Key thing popped in my brain, and I was like, that was my first concert. And then I believe my second concert would have been DeGarmo and Key again in Wichita, October of 91 at Century 2. That was a really odd concert because that was my first time dealing with death. A classmate of ours, William Hayes, had died that Saturday. He had died that morning in a car accident on his way over to Greensburg. And I remember being told about his death right before the concert. So it was very surreal to be there. I can remember a lot of thoughts going through my head. My first real rock show was Steppenwolf, and that would have been at Hutch Fest in Hutchinson, Kansas, on July 2nd of 1992. And I know that because, well, I looked it up, but I also know because the next morning, we drove to Philmont Scout Ranch. I had just finished as a camp counselor at Camp Kansas, and a couple of the older guys were going to hike Mount Wheeler, which is the highest mountain in New Mexico. And my mom actually let me go, and we climbed Mount Wheeler on July 4th. Yeah, it was a good time. That was my first. I'm glad I got to see that. But then 1995 hit. In 95, that was the year. I saw Wilco, Live, No Doubt, PJ Harvey, Bush, Toadies multiple times. All formed by members of the Descendants. Hum, Matthew Sweet. I saw Bush open for Goo Goo Dolls. But 311 is the band that grabbed my attention the most of all those bands that I saw. My first 311 show was at Clinton Lake, 1995. It was Jayhawk Music Fest. It was really hot and humid that day, and The Urge opened up. And I can remember there was a particle board barrier. That was the rail. And we're waiting for bands to come out. We're waiting for the first band to come out. And these guys with trombones and a sax come out. And we're like, what the fuck? And then this short little black dude pops out on stage. And we're like, okay, what the fuck? But I tell you what, from the minute they opened up with that first note, oh my Lord, it was insane. They had us going crazy, crazy, crazy. But Trippin' Daisy was there, Reverend Horton Heat. There were a lot of local bands as well. 311 was the headliner. Blue had just been released about a month before. And the Laser had been playing Down and Don't Stay Home and All Mixed Up for months. And by the time 311 came on, the sun had gone down, and I can remember Nick, he climbed up one of those giant lighting trusses, and he did a nesty plunge back into the crowd. And when I did a meet and greet with the guys in Kansas City in 2014, I still have that ticket stub, and they all signed it. And a few of them remembered it as well. Chad was like, wasn't that in a big field and hot as fuck? I mentioned Nick's nesty plunge, and his reply was, I was so high that day. So it was awesome that they remembered that show. Peanut's mom, he's the bassist, she has a story about that day. She says that she showed up with the lawn chair, and they weren't going to let her in because they weren't allowed. And she tells them, if this chair doesn't come with me, 311 doesn't play. And so we all know how that ended up, right? My second 311 show was the last of the 95 tour. They played in Kansas City, Kansas at Memorial Hall, and a great set list. And of course, back then they didn't have a lot to play, so everything was fantastic. But after my first two live shows, I was hooked. I was astonished at how many people, mainly girls, knew all the lyrics, the energy, the style of music, and just how cool they all looked on stage rocking out. My third 311 show was June 6, 96 at Sandstone, and that's where parts of Enlarged to Show Detail were filmed. And then my fourth show was the Transist Tour at Sandstone in 97, the year the Transistor came out. 311 used to travel all of the college towns all over the Midwest, repeatedly in the early 90s, and they had a lot of love for Lawrence and Kansas City. The lead singer, Nick Hexum, he had a side project for a while called Nick Hexum Quintet. And they played at the Granada in Lawrence in January of 2014. And Nick tells a story that if it wasn't for KU, that 311 would have never happened, as his parents met in Lawrence in the 1960s. So, no KU, no 311. Back to The Urge. They are the band that I have seen the most live, second to 311. And a lot of those were them opening for 311 over the years, and then there's a lot of solo shows. And then 96, that was, 96 was a great year for music. That's when I got into a lot of ska. I found Sublime. And then there's a compilation CD called Misfits of Ska that was in my CD player for many, many years. So if you're a ska head, and you like the stuff that's not just cheesy ska, it's some good stuff on there. I went to Lollapalooza that year. Metallica, Soundgarden, Rancid, Ramones, the Cocteau Twins, Screaming Trees, Ben Folds 5, Sponge, Psychotica. And I've recently started a project where I'm chronicling all my shows. So I've got a notebook where I'm putting all those in. So I saved ticket stubs and things like that. Now I have to save the wristbands because you don't get tickets. Everything's virtual. So I saved the wristbands, and then I write on there what date it was and who the artist was. So we've been talking a lot just about my earlier years of music, and just take some time to talk about how music makes me feel, the nourishment that I get from it. I get rejuvenation. It helps me with reflection, motivation, relaxation. And then going to a live show, just the anticipation, being in the crowd with other people, just realizing how connected we are, especially in those moments. Let's talk about now some of my best concerts and some stories that have gone with those. So the one I'll start off with first is my pocket chicken story. It was at Les Claypool and his Fearless Flying Frog Brigade show in Kansas City a couple summers ago. And there was a group of people that were in front of us that were all together, and then the group of people I was with. And we're all having a good time. We're kind of interacting at different points. And there's this one gal who is just really interacting with all of us and talking with us. And at one point, she says, "Is anybody hungry?" And she reaches in her pocket and she pulls out a chicken strip. And she offers me a chicken strip. And my first reaction, of course, is, no, I'm a food safety inspector. I don't want your pocket chicken. And so she puts it back in her pocket. I have never seen anything like that before or since. And so that's the pocket chicken story. But some of my best shows that I've been to, I was lucky to see Ween, the 25th anniversary 311 show at Sokol Hall in Omaha, the 311 Transistor show in Chicago. There was a trip I took to California in 2022 where I stayed with my friend Jason Rodriguez. And I got to see some amazing bands that trip. At the House of Blues in Anaheim, I got to see the Agrolites with Long Beach Dub All-Stars, and Opie Ortiz was on the mic. And Pato Banton came out and played with them. That was a wonderful show. Then the next night, we went to L.A., where 311 played From Chaos at the Wiltern Theater, and the Funk Junkies opened for them, if you remember the Funk Junkies. And then in Anaheim, I got to see Poppy, Jane's Addiction, and Smashing Pumpkins. That was a special treat. Wonderful, wonderful shows. Man, there's so many more. I could just sit here and go on and on. Many concerts, many bands. And then I think of my daughters and other things I want to talk about here. Don't be a music snob. Don't give younger fans a hard time at shows. I can remember specifically Ryan and I went to Don McLean, and there was a couple of younger gals that were sitting in front of us, and it was, I witnessed so many people around them question why they were there, or do you even know this music, and I've been around and I've seen this. Don't do that. Encourage younger fans, right? If you see a young kid, if you see somebody younger than you wearing a Nirvana shirt, don't ask them how many Nirvana songs they actually know. Say something like, "Man, if you like Nirvana, you'd love Pa," right? Like, lead them on to something else. And stay up on new music. To embrace all forms of music is mind expansion. You can appreciate and find beauty in anything. You can appreciate and find beauty beyond or versus what we like versus what we dislike. Of course, some things just don't hit, and that's okay. But not before you at least give it a shot. It's like a picky eater. You never know until you give it a try. I really encourage you to go in blind every now and then. And what I mean by going in blind is looking who's going to be in concert close to you and just going without even knowing who they are, without even listening to any of their music. A couple of examples for me was Andy Frasco. I'd never heard any of Andy's songs, and I went to his concert blown away. And now I've seen him twice. Another one was the Black Angels. I had a free night. I looked to see who was playing at the Bottleneck. Black Angels. Never heard of them. Went. It was phenomenal. And then a lot of openers that I'd never seen before. So I encourage you to just go. I think sometimes if we decide we don't know the music, then we're not going to have a good time, or we set ourselves up for that. And then as far as it comes to the girls, my daughters, the morning I was putting all of this together, Joe and I sat at the kitchen table for an hour and a half, listening to and talking about music. She's keeping me up on the new stuff like Cat's Eye, Leve. We listened to almost the whole Sabrina Carpenter album. And I think that's important, to stay up on what's new. I have no room to talk. For years and years, all I listened to was 311, Sublime, Chili Peppers, and the 90s. And I missed out on so many good bands and so much good music, to where now I jump all over the place. I'm listening to so many different artists and so many different genres. But my kids have always had musical freedom. They've never been censored on what they listen to. I would take the older two to Warped Tour. Many years we went. I got to know a lot of bands by listening to what they were listening to, and I appreciate, like I said at the start, just these people, just these bands, these young kids, these old kids, everybody just getting up there and doing their thing. I honestly believe that we are in a golden age of music, and not necessarily the music itself, but just the fact that any one of the 8 billion people on this planet, if they have an idea and the will and the wanting to learn, they can do it. They can put their music out there. Just like I'm doing my own podcast and I've done my own audiobooks. To have the insight into what is going on into other people's brains and their artistic abilities, it helps us all because we realize we're not alone. We realize that maybe our thoughts are not as crazy as we think they are when we realize other people are thinking them. The other thing about music is that it led me to Ram Dass, which led me to a more profound way of thinking, beyond the Four Agreements. I was sitting in a restaurant typing a inspection report, and I heard a song come on the Muzak that sounded like it was Thievery Corporation. I had really been listening to a lot of them lately, and the longer I listened, the more I was like, who is that? And I was aware enough to stop what I was doing and take the time to figure out who the artist was. And I did the phone thing where you hold your phone up and listen to the song, and it was a musician called David Starfire. So I got home that night and I opened up Spotify, and his first few tracks, David Starfire, are with Ram Dass. And those tracks changed my life, even more profoundly than the Four Agreements had. But without the Four Agreements, I would have been open to finding this. But music is what led me to Ram. And then what led me to Alan Watts. I had read about these guys. I knew of Alan Watts. I knew of Ram Dass. But I'd never listened to them. So music led me to more profound change. I want to read you something that Alan Watts says about music. Music is a kind of non-purposive thing, because you don't either play music to reach a destination, nor do you dance to reach a particular place on the floor. It is the doing of it itself that is important. Music. It is the doing of it itself that is important. Because after all, if the object of music were to gain a certain destination, those orchestras that play fastest would be considered the best. Dancing and music, more than other arts, represent the nature of this world. The nature of this world that is playful, that is sport, that is maybe sincere, but is definitely not serious. And as G.K. Chesterton put it once, the angels fly because they take themselves lightly. Recently, I was at the dentist and I was sitting in the chair, waiting on Eleanor to be born, and I was thinking about how music is everywhere. There was a little radio in the room that I was in, and then you could hear a radio in a different room. I was just thinking about how music is everywhere. It's in stores and streets. It's in elevators. So I started wondering about the psychology of music in public. So I did some research, and there's a well-studied psychology behind music playing in retail, dining, and other public spaces. Businesses and institutions use music strategically because it can shape mood, influence your behavior, and even affect how long people stay or how much they spend. Music in public spaces matters because it's a mood regulator. Music can lift your spirits, it can reduce stress, or create calm. For example, slow, soft music in restaurants encourages diners to linger, while upbeat tracks in retail can energize shoppers. Studies show that tempo, volume, and genre directly affect consumer behavior. Slow tempo music slows the walking pace in stores, leading to more browsing and more spending. Fast beats can increase table turns in busy cafes. Some public spaces, like subways or convenience stores, they play classical music late at night to discourage loitering or antisocial behavior. And then there's the memory and association that comes along with songs. Familiar songs can trigger nostalgia, making people feel more connected to a brand or a space. Retailers often use this to build loyalty. And then there's perception of time. And this is the one that really stuck with me. Music can make waiting feel shorter. That's why you hear curated playlists in doctors' offices, airports, or elevators. It reduces perceived boredom or anxiety. And then research also shows that French music in a wine shop leads to more French wine sales, while German music boosted German wine purchases. The subconscious cues are very powerful. And then there's stress reduction. Like in hospitals or waiting rooms in dentist offices, calming music reduces anxiety and lowers perceived pain. Basically, music changes physiological arousal, your heart rate, breathing, and alertness, and lyrics or genres can prime certain associations. Romantic songs in flower shops, or energetic beats in a gym. Music acts as a subtle signal that shapes how people interpret the space around them. So you see, music in public spaces isn't random. It's a carefully chosen psychological tool. Think of that next time you're out and about. As we wrap up a little bit here, some current bands I've been listening to a lot of lately. The Revivalists, Magic City Hippies, Godzillionaire, Thievery Corporation, They Watch Us from the Moon, Nathan got me into Aesop Rock, Fugazi, The New Stick Figure has been on repeat for me, Tosca, John Kennedy, Coyote Island, Layup, East Forest, Grammatic, Moderator, and Tropidelic. I could go on and on, but those are the ones that I've been listening to recently. And I'll leave links to my playlist in the notes for this show. But as we wrap up, I just want to talk about the connection that we have with other people through music and shared experiences. I was reflecting on what music meant for me for this episode, and I think about being in the kitchen, traveling. It grounds me at times. Music helps me express things through dancing, singing. And then we create those connections. I have found my closest friends through music. through concerts, through shared experiences. You know, when you're at a concert, you're having the same visceral experience as the person next to you. And that's how you can see that we're all connected and through those shared things. Music can help people escape from abusive situations. Another person to take us away. Music sparks my imagination. I have a very visual brain. I can literally visualize what you are singing to me or talking to me about. But I think music, especially live music, can help end our paranoia towards each other and help us see how alike we all are through our shared experiences. Music can be a vehicle in which we meet, like our personalities are, like Ram Dass says. I would not have the friends and the network of amazing people without it. Along with that, I don't listen to music every day. I don't listen to it 24 hours a day. It's sacred to me. It's special to me. Some days it's none, or very, very little. Maybe it's just in the car. And then I have those days where it's all music. I just think sometimes when we listen, and we don't let silence in, and we don't take the time to be silent, we always fill it with noise, that we miss out on a lot of things. And then we appreciate it more when we go back. I haven't listened to a lot of 311 over the past couple years, but when I do, it hits differently than when I listen to it every single day. I would also challenge you to go back and revisit something you didn't like a month ago or a year ago or 10 years ago. See if you've changed. I've been challenged by a friend myself to do that with a certain album that I did not like when I first heard it. But I challenge you to go back, give it another shot. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you found some value in this. You can see how early deprivation fueled lifelong devotion, how forbidden music made me hunt it, to go out and find it and make it my own. I used to hide in a closet to listen to music, and now I'm not just listening, I'm producing, I'm narrating, I'm curating. So thank you for joining me today and the story about how life has changed my music. If this episode spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs a little nourishment. New episodes drop bi-weekly, so bring a friend, and let's help walk each other home. This has been the Morning Almonds Podcast. Please support local musicians, artists, and other creatives.